Hey everyone, welcome to Curiosity. Let's solve question 1934, confirmation rate. The question describes confirmation rate of a user as the number of confirmed messages divided by the total number of requested confirmation messages. The confirmation rate of a user that did not request any confirmation message is 0. The question asks us to round the confirmation rate to 2 decimal places. We need to find the solution to the confirmation rate of each user. We are allowed to return the result table in any order. Let's look at the example provided to try and understand this question a little better. So we have two input tables, signups and confirmations. The signups table holds the columns user ID and timestamp. The confirmations table holds the columns user ID, timestamp and action. In the confirmations table, we can observe that there are 3 records corresponding to the user ID 7. The action for all of these records is confirmed, and hence the confirmation rate for user ID 7 is 3 divided by 3, which is 1 or 100%. Similarly, we can observe that there are 2 records corresponding to the user ID 2, and the action for one of these records is confirmed, and for the other record the action is timeout. This means the confirmation rate for user ID 2 would be 1 divided by 2, which is 0.5 or 50%. We can also observe that in the desired output, the confirmation rate for user ID 6 is 0. And the reason for this is because there is no record in the confirmations table corresponding to user ID 6. And what this means is basically that the user 6 has not requested any confirmation message, and hence there is no record in the confirmations table. Finally, we can observe that there are 2 records corresponding to user ID 3, and both of these records have an action of timeout. Hence the confirmation rate for user ID 3 would be 0 divided by 2, which is 0. So this question might seem a little complicated at first, but let's get into writing the SQL query, and I'll explain the approach we're going to take as we go along. So let's start by writing select star using star as a placeholder. And the question is, which table do we use? So we can observe that the confirmations table holds the column action, which is important to solving the question. We can also observe that the signups table has all the different user IDs who have signed up. So there could be a situation where a user ID is present in the signups table but is absent from the confirmations table, and hence we would also require the signups table. And that's the reason why I'm going to do select star from signups and left join it, or join it basically with the confirmations table. I'm going to use the user ID to join both of these tables. So I'm going to say s.user ID equals to c.user ID. And what we need to do next is to group by the user ID. And because the question is asking us to find the confirmation rate for each user. So let's go ahead and group by the user ID. And this completes the first part of the query. So now what we need to do is we need to build what are the different columns that would be needed to generate this confirmation rate. So confirmation rate is not something we can get directly. We would need to create an intermediate table, and I'm going to show how to do that right now. So the intermediate table will have the first column as user ID, because that's something that is required even in the desired output. And the second column is going to be, I'm going to call it as count timeout. So the count timeout is basically a column that is going to count all the records which have the action as timeout. So to do that, I'm going to say case when c.action is equal to let's say timeout. So when the action is timeout, then I'm going to count by 1, else I'm going to count as 0 and end this. So since we are counting all such individual rows where the action is timeout, I'm also going to sum up all of these. So I'm going to say sum all such records. So sum of all of such records. And the next column that I'm going to generate is something called a count confirmed. So it's going to be very similar to count timeout, but count confirmed is going to keep a track, or it's going to count all the records where the action is confirmed. So we have generated 2 new columns, and the final third column that I'm going to generate is again going to be similar to this, but this time it's going to be called as count none. So the count none column is going to count all records for which the action is null. And so let me just write that. So I'm going to do the ISNULL check. So it's going to check if the action is null, and if it is null, I'm going to count by 1. So the reason why we are doing this count none is because let's take the scenario of the user ID 6. So when we do a left join of this table with the confirmation of the signups table with the confirmation table, since user ID 6 is not in the confirmation table, the action we would get a null value for all the actions. So and the null value needs to be and all such cases need to be accounted for when we are counting the confirmation rate. So what I'm going to do is, and that's the reason why we have used count null, or we have created the count none column. So let's go ahead and run this query to check if our intermediate table is generated correctly. Okay, see there's an error here. Okay, this forgot to add a comma. Okay, so this is our intermediate table that we have, and basically we see that the user IDs are grouped by, basically all user IDs are grouped into unique user IDs, and we have 3 additional columns. And now what we need to do is we need to use these 3 columns to calculate the confirmation rate. And to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a common table expression of this intermediate table. And I'm going to use this common table expression. Let's say select star from common table expression. And since our output we require the user ID, I'm going to add that. And the next column is going to be called as confirmation rate. And now we need to compute this confirmation rate. So confirmation rate is essentially going to be the count of confirmed divided by the total count. So the total count is count confirmed plus count timeout plus count none. So this is going to give us a ratio, and since we need to round this off to 2 decimal places, I'm going to say round. Also, another thing to note here is that since we are doing integer division, it could lead to integer division issues. So I'm going to explicitly typecast this by saying 1.0 multiplied by this ratio. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and run this query to see if it passes the test case. Okay, the test case is passed. Let's try and submit it to see if it works. Okay, great. So solution is accepted, the runtime is good, and that's how you solve this question. Thank you, everyone.